The rain hammered against the wooden shutters of Samuel's farmhouse like bullets from heaven. Through the storm's fury, 3 desperate knocks echoed through the night. When he opened that door, Samuel faced a choice that would define not just his character, but the fate of an entire territory. The woman standing before him, drenched, trembling, with a $500 bounty on her head, would test everything he believed about justice, mercy, and what it truly means to do what's right. This is the story of how one moment of compassion ignited a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the Old West. What would you do if helping a stranger meant risking everything you've built? Stay with us as we uncover this incredible true story of courage, redemption, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when the whole world seems against you. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and subscribe for more untold stories from the American frontier. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly under a canopy of angry clouds, the autumn of 1882 bringing with it the kind of storm that made even the hardiest pioneers question their resolve. Samuel Hartwell pressed his weathered hands against the frost-kissed window of his modest farmhouse, watching sheets of rain turn his carefully tended fields into rivers of mud. At 43, he had seen his share of harsh weather, but this tempest felt different, charged with an electricity that made his skin crawl and his cattle huddle together in fearful clusters. Samuel had built this life with his own 2 hands after the war. The small ranch, nestled in a valley between 2 rolling hills, represented 15 years of back-breaking labor, failed crops, successful harvests, and the kind of solitude that either broke a man or made him stronger. His wife Martha had passed 3 winters ago from consumption, leaving him alone with memories and a stubborn determination to honor her dream of civilizing this wild corner of America. The farmhouse itself was simple but sturdy, thick log walls chinked with clay and moss, a stone chimney that drew well, and windows that Martha had insisted upon despite the extra expense. "A home needs light," she had said, and Samuel had obliged, never regretting the decision even when winter winds found every gap in the frames. Tonight, those windows rattled like chattering teeth as the storm raged with uncommon fury. Thunder crashed overhead with such violence that the hanging pots in Martha's kitchen clanged together like a discordant bell choir. Samuel's old hound, Jasper, whined and pressed himself against his master's legs, seeking comfort from the atmospheric chaos. The dog had been Martha's companion first, and now served as Samuel's only confidant in the long conversations that lonely men have with their animals. It was just past 10 o'clock when the knocking came. 3 deliberate raps on the heavy oak door, barely audible above the storm's symphony. Samuel froze, his hand halfway to the coffee pot. In 15 years of frontier living, he had learned that visitors after dark usually brought trouble, and visitors during storms like this brought the kind of trouble that changed lives forever. Jasper's ears perked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The dog's instincts had kept Samuel alive through encounters with wolves, bears, and the occasional desperate outlaw seeking shelter. But this growl was different, uncertain rather than threatening, curious rather than protective. The knocking came again, more insistent but somehow plaintive. Samuel grabbed his Winchester from above the mantel, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. He had fought in the war, survived skirmishes with hostile tribes, and faced down claim jumpers, but something about this moment felt pregnant with consequence. "Who's there?" he called through the door, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Silence. Then, barely audible above the wind, "Please, I need help." The voice was distinctly feminine, young, and carried the kind of exhaustion that came from running hard and far. Samuel hesitated, his hand on the door's iron latch. Every instinct told him to keep the barrier between himself and whatever waited in the storm. But Martha's voice seemed to whisper in the wind. "We help those in need, Samuel. That's what separates us from the animals." He opened the door. The woman who stumbled into his home was perhaps 25, with dark hair plastered to her skull by rain, and clothing so soaked it clung to her slight frame like a second skin. Her dress, once fine blue cotton with pearl buttons, now hung in tatters. Blood seeped through a makeshift bandage on her left arm, and her brown eyes held the wild look of a cornered animal. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that struck Samuel first, sharp, calculating, and desperately hopeful. This was no simple farm wife seeking shelter. This woman carried secrets, and secrets in the Wyoming Territory usually meant danger. "Lord Almighty," Samuel breathed, lowering his rifle. "What happened to you?" She collapsed rather than sat in Martha's rocking chair, water pooling around her muddy boots. "They're coming," she whispered, glancing toward the window as if expecting riders to materialize from the storm. "I shouldn't have come here. I'm so sorry, but I saw your light and I—" "Easy now," Samuel interrupted, his natural compassion overriding caution. "You're safe here. Let me get you something warm." As he moved toward the kitchen, she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "You don't understand. There's a bounty on me. $500. If they find me here, they'll have to go through me first," Samuel said quietly, the words emerging before his rational mind could stop them. He looked down at this stranger, this wanted woman who had brought danger to his doorstep, and saw only a fellow human being in desperate need. The woman's grip loosened, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. "You don't even know who I am." Samuel gently extracted his wrist and continued to the kitchen. "Don't reckon I need to. Storm like this, nobody should be out in it alone." He returned with a thick blanket and a cup of hot coffee, both of which she accepted with trembling hands. As she sipped the bitter brew, color slowly returned to her pale cheeks. Samuel stoked the fire, adding logs until the flames danced high and the room filled with welcome warmth. Jasper, his initial wariness fading, padded over to sniff the stranger before settling at her feet with the satisfied sigh of a dog who had decided this human was acceptable. "My name is Elena," she said finally, her voice stronger now. "Elena Vasquez. I suppose you deserve to know who you're helping." The name meant nothing to Samuel, but he nodded encouragingly. "Samuel Hartwell, this is my land such as it is." Eleanor looked around the simple room, taking in Martha's quilts, the family Bible on the mantel, the wedding photograph that Samuel couldn't bring himself to move, and something in her expression softened. "You live here alone?" "Since my wife passed, yes." Samuel settled into his own chair, the Winchester within easy reach, but no longer prominently displayed. "What's got you running so hard on a night like this?" For a long moment, Eleanor stared into the fire. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of painful truth. "They say I killed a man. Judge Morrison in Cheyenne shot him dead in his own courtroom." Samuel felt his blood chill. Judge Morrison had been a prominent figure in territorial politics, his death 3 weeks ago the talk of every settlement from Laramie to Sheridan. The newspapers had painted the killer as a cold-blooded murderer, a dangerous outlaw who had escaped justice through cunning and luck. "Did you?" Samuel asked quietly. Elena met his eyes directly. "Yes, I did." The honesty of it hit Samuel like a physical blow. He had expected denials, explanations, pleas of innocence. Instead, this young woman sat in his dead wife's chair and admitted to murder with the calm acceptance of someone who had made peace with their choices. "Then you understand why I can't," Samuel began. "He killed my family," Elena continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. "My husband Miguel, my baby daughter Rosa. Morrison owned the biggest ranch in the territory, and he wanted our water rights. When we refused to sell, he hired men to convince us. When they were done convincing, my family was dead, and our house was burned to the ground." Samuel leaned back in his chair, the moral certainty he had felt moments before dissolving into murky complexity. "Why didn't you go to the law?" Elena's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Morrison was the law. Who was I going to tell? The sheriff he appointed? The deputies on his payroll?" She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I spent 2 years gathering evidence, learning his habits, planning. When I finally faced him in that courtroom, I gave him a chance to confess, to make it right. He laughed at me, called me a greasy Mexican whore, and said he'd have me hanged for even suggesting such things. So you shot him." "So I shot him." Eleanor's eyes never left Samuel's face. "Right there in front of God and everybody, and I'm not sorry." Outside, the storm began to show signs of weakening, the thunder moving eastward, and the rain settling into a steady patter. Samuel found himself studying this woman, this killer, who had brought chaos into his ordered world. By all rights, he should turn her in. The bounty alone would buy him 3 good breeding bulls and enough supplies to last the winter. But as he looked at Elena Vasquez, Samuel didn't see a murderer. He saw a woman who had lost everything and chosen justice over safety, truth over survival. He saw someone who reminded him, in ways he couldn't articulate, of Martha's fierce determination to build something good in a world that often rewarded only cruelty. "They'll come looking," he said finally. "I know." Elena set down the empty coffee cup and began to rise. "I'll go. I never should have—" "Sit down," Samuel said firmly. "I didn't say I was turning you out." Hope flickered in Elena's eyes, quickly suppressed by hard-won caution. "Why would you help me? You don't owe me anything." Samuel looked toward Martha's photograph, remembering her words about what separated humans from animals. "Maybe that's exactly why I should." As the storm finally began to break, neither Samuel nor Elena could imagine how this single act of mercy would ripple outward, touching lives across the territory and ultimately reshaping the very meaning of justice in the American West. But that story would have to wait for morning, when the consequences of compassion would begin to unfold in ways neither of them could possibly foresee. For now, there was only the crackling fire, the sound of settling rain, and two wounded souls finding unexpected solace in the simple act of shared humanity. The first light of dawn crept through Samuel's windows like a cautious animal, revealing a world transformed by the storm's passage. Puddles reflected the pale sky like scattered mirrors, and the air carried the clean scent of washed earth and growing things. Samuel had slept poorly, his dreams filled with Martha's voice and the weight of the decision he had made. He woke to find Elena already awake, sitting by the window with Jasper at her feet, both of them watching the eastern horizon with the alertness of creatures who understood that danger often arrived with the sunrise. "Sleep at all?" Samuel asked quietly, pulling on his boots. Elena turned from the window, and in the morning light he could see her more clearly. Despite the ordeal she had endured, there was a strength in her bearing that spoke of deep reserves of courage. The torn dress had been mended as best she could manage, and she had braided her long hair back from her face in a practical style that reminded Samuel of Martha's no-nonsense approach to frontier life. "Some," she replied, though the dark circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "I keep thinking I should leave. Every minute I stay here puts you in danger." Samuel moved to the kitchen and began preparing coffee, the familiar ritual helping to settle his nerves. "Where would you go? How far could you get on foot with that wound?" Elena unconsciously touched her bandaged arm. In the clear morning light, Samuel could see that the blood had seeped through the makeshift dressing during the night. The injury needed proper tending, another reason why sending her back into the wilderness would be tantamount to murder. "I have friends in Colorado Territory," Elena said. "Mexican families who knew Miguel. If I could reach them—" "That's 300 miles through some of the roughest country in the West," Samuel interrupted, handing her a cup of coffee. "You'd never make it alone." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses drifted through the morning air. Samuel felt his stomach drop as he counted the hoofbeats, at least 6 riders, moving at a steady pace that suggested purpose rather than casual travel. Elena was already on her feet, her body tensed for flight. "The root cellar," Samuel said quickly, pointing toward a trapdoor partially hidden beneath a braided rug. "Martha used it for preserves. You can—" "No." Elena's voice was firm. "I won't hide while you face whatever comes. If they're here for me, I won't let you pay the price for my choices." Samuel wanted to argue, but the riders were already in his yard. Through the window, he could see 6 men on horseback, their leader a tall figure in a black coat whose very presence seemed to cast shadows. Samuel recognized him immediately. Deputy Marshal Thorne, a man whose reputation for brutality had earned him fear throughout the territory. Thorne was young for his position, perhaps 30, but he carried himself with the cold confidence of someone who had never met a problem he couldn't solve with violence. His pale eyes missed nothing as they surveyed Samuel's property, and when he dismounted, his hand rested casually on the butt of his Colt revolver. "Samuel Hartwell," Thorne called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. Samuel stepped onto his porch, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. "That's right, what can I do for you, Marshal?" "Deputy Marshal Thorne," the man corrected, studying Samuel with undisguised suspicion. "I'm tracking a dangerous fugitive. Mexican woman, about 25, dark hair. Calls herself Elena Vasquez. She murdered Judge Morrison in cold blood 3 weeks ago." "Heard about that," Samuel replied carefully. "Terrible thing." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "She was seen heading this direction after the storm broke. You wouldn't happen to have seen anyone matching that description, would you?" The question hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Samuel was acutely aware of Elena listening from inside the house, of the weight of the Winchester just beyond his reach, of the choice that would define not just this moment, but the rest of his life. "Can't say I have," Samuel said finally. "Storm last night was fierce enough to keep any sane person indoors." One of Thorne's men, a scarred individual with the look of someone who enjoyed his work too much, leaned forward in his saddle. "Mind if we search your place, just to be thorough?" "I'd mind considerably," Samuel replied, his voice remaining calm despite the rapid beating of his heart. "This is my property, and I don't recall inviting you onto it." Thorne smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Now, Mr. Hartwell, we're just trying to do our jobs. Bringing in dangerous criminals is serious business. Surely a law-abiding citizen like yourself would want to cooperate." "I'm cooperating just fine," Samuel said. "I answered your question honestly. Now, unless you've got a warrant, I'd appreciate it if you'd move along. I've got work to do." The tension in the yard was palpable. Samuel could see the other riders shifting in their saddles, hands moving closer to weapons. These weren't just lawmen. They were bounty hunters, mercenaries who would kill anyone who stood between them and $500. "You know," Thorne said conversationally, "harboring a fugitive is a serious crime in the territory, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Or worse if the fugitive resists arrest and someone gets hurt in the process." Behind him, Samuel heard the soft creak of a floorboard. Elena was moving, though whether to hide or to fight, he couldn't tell. What he did know was that this conversation was rapidly approaching a point where words would no longer suffice. "Marshal Thorne," Samuel said, deliberately using the full title, "I've been nothing but honest with you. I haven't seen your fugitive, and I don't appreciate the implication that I'm lying. Now, like I said, unless you've got legal authority to be on my land, I'd like you to leave." Thorne's hand moved to his gun. "You're making a mistake, Hartwell." "The only mistake," came Elena's voice from the doorway, "would be letting you terrorize an innocent man." Every eye in the yard turned to see Elena standing in Samuel's doorway, her chin raised in defiance, despite the odds stacked against her. She had found Samuel's spare rifle somewhere in the house, and though she held it with obvious familiarity, Samuel knew it would do little good against 6 experienced killers. "Well, well," Thorne drawled, his previous tension evaporating into predatory satisfaction. "Elena Vasquez, I presume. You've led us quite a chase." "Not long enough, apparently," Elena replied, stepping onto the porch beside Samuel. "Though I notice you're hunting me with an awful lot of men for someone who's supposedly interested in justice." Thorne laughed. "Justice was what you got when you murdered Judge Morrison. What you're going to get now is a rope around your neck." "Morrison was a murderer and a thief," Elena said, her voice carrying across the yard with startling clarity. "He killed my family for their land, and he would have killed more families if someone hadn't stopped him." "That's not what the law says," Thorne replied, "and I represent the law in this territory." Samuel had remained silent during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. "So whose law? Morrison's law? The same law that let him steal land and murder families?" Thorne's attention snapped back to Samuel. "You're making this personal, Hartwell. That's not wise." "It became personal the moment you rode onto my land with threats and accusations," Samuel replied. "Elena Vasquez is under my protection. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The words surprised even Samuel as they left his mouth. He had not planned to make such a declaration, but something about Elena's courage had awakened something in him. Perhaps the same sense of justice that had driven him to fight in the war, the same moral certainty that Martha had always insisted was worth any sacrifice. Thorne's smile vanished. "You're harboring a murderer, Hartwell. That makes you an accessory after the fact." "I'm protecting someone who was failed by the system you represent," Samuel countered. "If that's a crime, then maybe the system needs changing." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 6 armed men against a farmer and a wounded woman, but Samuel felt no fear, only a strange sense of rightness, as if this moment had been inevitable from the instant he opened his door to Elena. "Last chance, Hartwell," Thorne said quietly. "Step aside, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." Samuel looked at Elena, seeing in her eyes the same determination that had driven her to seek justice for her murdered family. Then he looked back at Thorne and his hired killers, representatives of a law that protected the wealthy and powerful while grinding the innocent beneath its boots. "No," Samuel said simply. Thorne's hand moved toward his gun, and Samuel tensed for what seemed like an inevitable gunfight. But before anyone could draw, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. Many horses, moving fast and with obvious purpose. Everyone in the yard turned to see a cloud of dust rising from the eastern road, growing larger by the second. Within moments, the source became clear. At least 20 riders approaching at full gallop, their leader carrying something that fluttered in the morning breeze. Samuel squinted against the rising sun, trying to make out details. The leader was an older man with silver hair and a military bearing, and the thing he carried was not a flag, but a piece of paper, an official document of some kind. As the riders drew closer, Samuel recognized several faces from town: shopkeepers, farmers, even the local doctor. These were not bounty hunters or hired guns, but ordinary citizens of the territory, and they were riding with the kind of urgency that suggested momentous news. Thorne had recognized them too, and his confident demeanor was rapidly giving way to uncertainty. "What the hell?" he muttered, his hand still hovering near his weapon. The riders thundered into Samuel's yard, surrounding Thorne and his men in a cloud of dust and snorting horses. The silver-haired leader, Samuel now recognized him as Colonel Henderson, a retired army officer who had served as mayor of the nearest town, held up the document he had been carrying. "Deputy Marshal Thorne," Henderson called out, his voice ringing with authority. "I have here a telegram from the territorial governor. You and your men are to cease your pursuit of Elena Vasquez immediately." Thorne's face went white. "That's impossible. The bounty has been withdrawn," Henderson continued. "Furthermore, you and your men are wanted for questioning in connection with the murder of Miguel Vasquez and his daughter, as well as numerous other crimes committed under the protection of the late Judge Morrison." The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel felt Elena sag against him as the weight of months of running finally began to lift from her shoulders. Around the yard, Thorne's men were looking at each other with the kind of uncertainty that came from realizing they had chosen the wrong side of history. "You're lying," Thorne snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. Henderson smiled grimly. "Elena Vasquez's testimony, combined with evidence gathered by federal investigators, has exposed Morrison's criminal enterprise. The governor has issued full pardons for anyone who took action against Morrison's illegal activities." Samuel looked at Elena, seeing tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sorrow, but of relief so profound it seemed to transform her entire being. After years of running, hiding, and fighting, justice had finally found her. But even as Samuel celebrated Elena's vindication, he knew that this moment was just the beginning. The forces that had protected Morrison and his crimes would not simply disappear overnight, and there would be consequences for everyone who had chosen to stand against them. Still, as he watched Thorne and his men retreat under the watchful eyes of Henderson's citizen militia, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death: hope for a future worth building. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of revelation and reckoning that transformed not just Elena's fate, but the entire political landscape of the Wyoming Territory. Samuel's modest farmhouse became an unlikely headquarters for what the territorial newspapers would later call the Morrison investigation, as federal marshals, territorial officials, and Eleanor herself worked to unravel years of corruption and violence. Eleanor had spent 3 days giving testimony to federal investigators, her detailed accounts of Morrison's crimes corroborated by evidence that had been quietly gathered by other victims and concerned citizens. Samuel watched her during these sessions, marveling at her composure as she recounted the worst moments of her life for the official record. There was a strength in her that went beyond mere survival, a moral clarity that reminded him why he had risked everything to protect her. 23 families, Elena said to Samuel on the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. That's how many Morrison displaced or destroyed to build his empire. 23 families who lost everything because one man decided their land was worth more than their lives. Samuel whittled absently at a piece of pine, a habit he had developed during his years of solitude. "And now they'll get justice." "Some kind of justice," Elena replied. "The survivors will get their land back. The families of the dead will receive compensation. Morrison's assets are being seized to pay for it all." She paused, staring out at the horizon. "But Miguel and Rosa are still dead. No amount of money or justice can bring them back. It was a truth that Samuel understood intimately. No legal proceeding could restore Martha to his side, just as no court decision could undo the pain that Elena carried. Justice was important, but it was not the same as healing. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked gently. Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. For so long my whole life was about bringing Morrison to account. Now that it's done—" She shrugged. "I feel lost, I suppose. Like a soldier after a war, not sure what to do with peace." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a lone rider, moving slowly up the path to Samuel's house. As the figure drew closer, Samuel recognized Dr. Matthews from town, a man whose medical skills had saved more lives in the territory than anyone could count. "Samuel," Dr. Matthews called out as he dismounted. "Miss Vasquez, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Doc," Samuel replied, rising to greet the visitor. "What brings you out this way?" "Doctor." Matthews was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of gentle demeanor that put patients at ease. But tonight, his usual calm was replaced by obvious excitement. "I have news," he said. "News that I think will interest both of you." Eleanor joined them, her expression curious. "What kind of news?" "The kind that might give you both a new purpose," Dr. Matthews replied. "You see, with Morrison's criminal enterprise exposed, there are a lot of changes happening in the territory. New officials, new policies, new opportunities." He paused dramatically. "Including the establishment of a new settlement, a town built from the ground up, designed to serve the families that Morrison displaced and others seeking a fresh start." Samuel felt a stirring of interest. "Where?" "About 50 miles south of here, in a valley that Morrison claimed illegally 10 years ago. Beautiful country, fertile soil, good water, protected from the worst weather." "Doctor." Matthews looked between Samuel and Elena. "They're looking for people to help establish the community, people with integrity, who understand what it means to stand up for what's right." Elena frowned. "I'm not sure I understand. What would my role be?" Dr. Matthews smiled. "The territorial governor has authorized the establishment of a new court system for the settlement. They need someone to serve as a justice of the peace, someone who understands the difference between law and justice, who has the trust of both the Mexican and Anglo communities." The suggestion hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Samuel watched as emotions played across her face. Surprise, fear, and something that might have been hope. "Me, a judge?" Elena shook her head. "I'm not qualified. I have no legal training, no—" "You have something better," Dr. Matthews interrupted. "You have the respect of everyone in the territory who believes in real justice. Your testimony didn't just bring down Morrison. It inspired people to believe that the system can work when good people are willing to fight for it." Samuel could see Elena struggling with the idea. After years of running from the law, the thought of representing it must have seemed impossible, but he could also see the appeal, a chance to ensure that what happened to her family never happened to others. "What about Samuel?" Eleanor asked suddenly, turning to look at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What would his role be?" Dr. Matthews's smile widened. "Funny you should ask. The new settlement needs someone to oversee agricultural development, someone with experience in farming, who understands the challenges of frontier life and has the respect of the community." Samuel felt his heart race. The possibility of a new start, a chance to build something meaningful, was appealing in ways he hadn't expected. But leaving his farm, the life he had built with Martha, felt like abandoning her memory. "I don't know," Samuel said slowly. "This place, it's all I have left of her." Eleanor stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the fields that Samuel had worked for so many years. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "honoring someone's memory means carrying their dreams forward, not keeping them frozen in place." The words resonated with Samuel in a way that surprised him. Martha had always talked about civilizing the frontier, about building communities where families could thrive in safety and prosperity. Perhaps this new settlement was exactly the kind of project she would have supported. "There's something else," Dr. Matthews added. "The territorial governor has authorized a special fund to compensate those who suffered under Morrison's regime. Elena, your courage in bringing him to justice has earned you a substantial settlement, enough to start over wherever you choose." Elena turned back to them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never wanted money. I just wanted justice for my family." "And you got it," Samuel said. "But that doesn't mean you can't also build a future. Miguel and Rosa wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life defined by their deaths." The conversation continued late into the night, as Dr. Matthews shared more details about the proposed settlement. The more Samuel heard, the more excited he became. This wasn't just about establishing another frontier town. It was about creating a community based on the principles of justice, equality, and mutual support that Morrison's reign had nearly destroyed. By the time Dr. Matthews rode away, both Samuel and Elena had agreed to at least visit the proposed site and meet with the other potential settlers. It wasn't a firm commitment, but it was a step toward a future neither of them had imagined possible just days before. Over the following week, Samuel found himself looking at his farm with new eyes. The fields that had been his pride and joy began to seem less like a legacy and more like a prison. Martha's dream hadn't been about this specific piece of land. It had been about building something larger, something that could outlast any individual life. Eleanor, meanwhile, threw herself into learning about territorial law and legal procedures. Samuel often found her reading legal texts by lamplight, preparing herself for a role she had never imagined taking on. There was a determination in her study that reminded him of her pursuit of Morrison. Once Elena set her mind to something, she pursued it with unwavering focus. "Are you sure about this?" Samuel asked her one evening, as she pored over a book about civil procedures. Elena looked up, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "No," she said honestly. "I'm terrified. The idea of sitting in judgment of others, of being responsible for dispensing justice, it feels overwhelming." "But," Samuel prompted. Elena smiled, the first truly joyful expression Samuel had seen from her since that first night. "But I keep thinking about all the people who didn't get justice under Morrison's system, all the families who suffered because the law protected the wrong people." She closed the book and looked directly at Samuel. "If I can help build something better, something that protects the innocent instead of the powerful, maybe Miguel and Rosa's deaths will have meant something." It was then that Samuel knew with certainty that they would make the journey south, would help build this new community, would take the risk of starting over. Not because it was safe or easy, but because it was right. 2 days later, they loaded a wagon with their essential possessions and set out for the valley that would become their new home. As they crested the final hill before leaving his property behind, Samuel turned for one last look at the farm, where he had known love and loss in equal measure. "Goodbye, Martha," he whispered to the wind. "I'll carry your dreams forward." Beside him, Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. They were both leaving their pasts behind, but they were also carrying the best of those pasts into an uncertain but hopeful future. The journey south would take 3 days, and at the end of it, they would find a valley full of possibilities and people ready to build something unprecedented in the American West. A community founded on justice rather than power, on cooperation rather than exploitation. But first, they had to get there. And as Samuel urged his horses forward into the unknown, he felt Martha's presence like a blessing on the wind, giving him the strength to embrace whatever lay ahead. The valley stretched before them like a promise kept, its green expanse cradled between gentle hills and bisected by a clear running stream that caught the morning sunlight like scattered diamonds. Samuel reined in his horses at the crest of the final ridge, both he and Eleanor falling silent as they took in their first glimpse of what would become Haven Valley, the settlement that would redefine justice in the Wyoming Territory. "It's beautiful," Elena breathed, and Samuel could hear the wonder in her voice. After days of travel through increasingly rough country, this pastoral scene felt like a reward for their faith. Below them, the valley was already showing signs of organized activity. Survey stakes marked out plots for homes and businesses, and several families had established temporary camps while they waited for lumber and supplies to arrive. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and Samuel could hear the distant sound of children playing, a sound that had been absent from his life for far too long. "There," Elena pointed to a spot near the stream where several adults were gathered around what appeared to be surveying equipment. "That must be where they plan to build the courthouse." Samuel studied the location with a farmer's eye for practical concerns. It was central to the valley, easily accessible from all directions, and situated on high enough ground to avoid flooding during spring runoff. Whoever had chosen the site understood both symbolism and practicality. The courthouse would be the heart of the community, both literally and figuratively. As they descended into the valley, Samuel noticed other details that spoke well of the settlement's planning. The proposed main street followed the natural contours of the land, and the residential plots were laid out with consideration for both privacy and community interaction. Gardens and small farms were integrated into the town plan rather than pushed to the periphery, creating a design that would be both functional and beautiful. Their arrival was noted long before they reached the main camp. A young boy came running to meet them, his face bright with excitement. "Are you the new settlers?" he called out. "Ma says we're getting a new judge and a farming expert." Eleanor laughed, the first time Samuel had heard her truly laugh since that first night at his farm. "I suppose we are," she replied, her voice warm with genuine happiness. "What's your name, young man?" "Tommy Morrison," the boy began, then stopped abruptly, his face flushing red. "I mean Tommy Williams. Ma says we don't use the other name anymore." Samuel felt a chill of understanding. This boy was related to Judge Morrison, probably a grandson or nephew, one of the innocent family members who would have to live with the legacy of what the judge had done. The fact that his mother had chosen to change their name spoke volumes about the shame and determination to start fresh. "Tommy Williams is a fine name," Elena said gently, dismounting from the wagon to speak with the boy at eye level. "And we're very pleased to meet you." The boy's relief was palpable. "Ma's gonna want to meet you both. She's been so worried about what folks would think of us being here on account of, well, you know." "Your uncle's crimes aren't your burden to carry," Elena said firmly. "Everyone deserves a chance to build something good." As they made their way toward the main encampment, Samuel marveled at Elena's instinctive compassion. Here was a woman who had every reason to hate anyone connected to Morrison, yet she was offering comfort to a child who bore his name. It was exactly the kind of wisdom that would make her an exceptional judge. The camp was a bustling hive of activity. Families from across the territory had converged on the valley, drawn by the promise of land ownership, free from corruption, and the chance to build a truly just community. Samuel recognized several faces from his rare trips to town, but many more were strangers: Mexican families displaced by Morrison's land grabs, freed slaves seeking opportunities in the West, European immigrants hoping for a fresh start. Near the center of the camp, a large tent served as temporary headquarters for the settlement committee. As Samuel and Elena approached, a woman emerged from the tent, tall, silver-haired, and carrying herself with natural authority. Samuel recognized her immediately: Catherine Martinez, widow of a Mexican rancher murdered by Morrison's men who had become an unofficial leader of the displaced families. "Elena Vasquez," Catherine said, her voice carrying both warmth and respect. "The woman who brought justice to our people. We are honored by your presence." Elena flushed at the praise. "I only did what needed to be done, and I'm here to help build something better, not to be honored for past actions." Catherine smiled. "Spoken like someone who truly understands leadership." She turned to Samuel. "And you must be Samuel Hartwell. Your reputation for integrity preceded you." The next several hours were a whirlwind of introductions, explanations, and planning sessions. Samuel met with the Agricultural Committee, discussing crop rotation, water management, and the challenges of high-altitude farming. Elena sat in on meetings with the legal committee, reviewing the territorial laws that would govern their new community, and discussing how to ensure that justice would be both fair and accessible to all residents. What struck Samuel most profoundly was the diversity of the group and the remarkable harmony they had achieved. Mexican vaqueros worked alongside German farmers, freed slaves shared expertise with Irish immigrants, and former Union and Confederate soldiers collaborated on construction projects. Morrison's reign of terror had created unlikely allies, bound together by shared suffering and common hope. As evening approached, the community gathered around a large fire for what had apparently become a nightly tradition, a communal meal followed by planning discussions and storytelling. Samuel found himself seated between Eleanor and an elderly Apache man named Joseph, who had served as a scout for the army and now hoped to establish a trading post in the new settlement. "This is remarkable," Samuel said to Joseph, as they watched children of various ethnicities playing together while their parents discussed the day's progress. I've never seen anything like it. Joseph nodded sagely. When people suffer together, they learn that skin color and language matter less than character. Morrison may have been evil, but his evil brought together people who might never have found common cause otherwise. During the meal, Tommy Williams shyly approached Elena with his mother in tow. Mary Williams was a woman in her 30s, prematurely aged by worry and hardship, but carrying herself with quiet dignity. "Miss Vasquez," Mary said hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you for your kindness to Tommy earlier, and I wanted to apologize." "There's nothing to apologize for," Elena interrupted gently. "You're not responsible for your brother-in-law's actions." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "He was my husband's brother, but Tom never approved of what Judge Morrison was doing. When Tom tried to speak up, the judge had him transferred to a remote cavalry post. Tom died in an Indian raid 2 years ago, and I've always wondered if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor reached out and took Mary's hand. "Your husband sounds like a man of principle. That's the legacy Tommy should inherit, not the judge's crimes." The simple gesture of compassion seemed to break down the last barriers in the camp. Word of Eleanor's kindness to the Morrison family spread quickly, and Samuel watched as people who had been cautiously polite became genuinely welcoming. It was a masterclass in leadership. Eleanor wasn't just accepting the position of judge, she was demonstrating the wisdom and fairness that would define her tenure. Later that evening, as the camp settled down for the night, Samuel and Eleanor found themselves walking along the stream that would soon flow through the heart of their new town. The water gurgled peacefully over smooth stones, and the stars overhead seemed brighter than Samuel remembered from his solitary farm. "Do you think we can really build something different here?" Eleanor asked, her voice thoughtful. Samuel considered the question seriously. "I think we have to try. All these people, they're not here by accident. They're here because they believe in something better." "I keep thinking about Tommy Williams," Elena said. "That boy carries the name of the man who killed my family. But when I look at him, I don't see Morrison. I see possibility." "That's exactly why you'll be a great judge," Samuel replied. "You see people as they could be, not just as they are." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then turned to face Samuel directly. "What about us? What do you see when you look at our future?" The question caught Samuel off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because he realized he had been avoiding thinking about it directly. Over the past weeks, Eleanor had become more than just someone he was protecting. She had become a partner, a friend, and perhaps something more. "I see two people who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and discovered they could build something good together," he said finally. "Whether that's just this town or something more personal, well, I suppose that's up to both of us to decide." Eleanor smiled, and in the starlight Samuel could see the woman she had been before tragedy shaped her life. Young, hopeful, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. "I'd like to explore that possibility," she said softly, "when I'm not sitting in judgment of cattle thieves and land disputes." Their laughter carried across the water, mixing with the night sounds of a community settling into sleep. Around them, families dreamed of the homes they would build, the businesses they would establish, the children they would raise in safety and prosperity. 3 months later, Haven Valley held its first official court session in a newly constructed courthouse that served as the pride of the growing town. Judge Elena Vasquez presided with wisdom and fairness that quickly became legendary throughout the territory, while Agricultural Commissioner Samuel Hartwell helped establish farming cooperatives that would feed not just their community, but neighboring settlements as well. The town grew rapidly, attracting families from across the West who had heard of a place where justice was truly blind, where opportunity was based on merit rather than connections, and where the mistakes of the past didn't determine the possibilities of the future. Tommy Williams grew up to become the town's first elected sheriff, carrying forward his father's principles rather than his uncle's crimes. Mary Williams opened a school that welcomed children of all backgrounds, teaching them that diversity was strength rather than division. Catherine Martinez established a legal aid society that helped other communities challenge corrupt officials, spreading the Haven Valley model throughout the territory. Dr. Matthews set up the town's first hospital, providing medical care regardless of patients' ability to pay. And Samuel and Elena. They were married in the courthouse Elena had helped establish, surrounded by the community they had helped build. Their wedding was a celebration not just of their love, but of the power of compassion to transform lives and create hope from the ashes of tragedy. Years later, when territorial historians wrote about the transformation of the Wyoming Territory from a lawless frontier to a beacon of justice and opportunity, they would trace it back to a single moment, when a lonely farmer opened his door to a hunted woman and chose mercy over safety. The ripple effects of that one act of kindness had spread far beyond anything Samuel or Elena could have imagined that stormy night. It had brought down a corrupt empire, established a model community, and proved that even in the harshest circumstances, good people could choose to do what was right. As Elena often said from the bench during her many years as judge, justice isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. It's about taking what's broken and making it whole again, one person, one family, one community at a time. Haven Valley stood as living proof of that philosophy, a testament to the enduring power of compassion to change the world. And at its heart were two people who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to build something better than what they had lost. The American West was full of stories about violence, greed, and the triumph of might over right. But Haven Valley told a different story, one of mercy, justice, and the remarkable things that happen when good people refuse to let evil have the final word. In the end, Samuel Hartwell had done more than save Elena Vasquez's life that stormy night. He had saved his own soul, and in doing so had helped save an entire territory from the corruption that had nearly consumed it. The door he opened to a hunted woman had become a doorway to a better future for everyone brave enough to walk through it, and that, perhaps, was the greatest justice of all. In the annals of the American West, where legends were born from violence and conquest, the story of Haven Valley stood as something different, a testament to the revolutionary power of a single act of mercy. Samuel Hartwell's decision to open his door on that stormy night had proven that sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in drawing a gun, but in extending a hand to someone in need. The bounty on Elena's head had been $500. The value of the community they built together, immeasurable. And it all began with a farmer who chose compassion over fear, mercy over safety, and love over indifference. In the end, that was the true treasure of the West, not the gold hidden in mountains or the silver buried in the earth, but the precious humanity that flourished when good people refused to let evil have the final word.